Hello, fellow OrgCom enthusiasts. This is time to talk about Module 4 discussion. And I admit the subject matter is kind of esoteric. It's difficult to pin down exact definitions or exactly what the author was getting at, but I'm ready to go through the questions following my script. Consider current organizations right now. Given the state of organizations as you understand them, what are the three most pressing questions or problems facing organizations, and so on. So, I wonder, do leaders recognize the value in their team members, or do they feel like they need subservience to define their status? Do leaders feel like their minions are there to prop them up, or that their team members are there to add value to the organization? Fundamental question. So chapter 4 deals with deconstructing what we mean by organization and communication. From previous chapters, we landed on the idea that an organization is really the integration of members within that group. This is the interpretive or social constructivism idea from page 151. Strong personalities, however, can take over. So the organization is this form made up of its members, but an individual can step in and dominate what that organization means. So they set the course for an organization, and the members can decide whether to flow along or to act out against it, or to basically to dissent. Most likely those who dissent will just be shamed and left on their own without the acceptance and benefits of an organization. The idea that an organization lives above and beyond the participants, which is post-positivist or functionalist from page 141, realistically has no basis. Neither does the idea that individuals can make changes to long-standing traditions without major disruption. We are far removed from the time when employees were just subservient robots with no power to talk back to authority, but it seems like organizations at all levels are not yet immune from their own human nature. A perfect example of an organization with tradition that I have direct experience with is the United States Army. When I joined, I already knew that it had a tradition, it has a certain way of doing things, a certain style, but close hand, I got to know that there are things that they've been doing that persist to today. Maybe they don't make much sense, but that's the way you do things, and that has worked for over 200 years. An example is all the French terminology that they use, like billet, revelry, all these things that harken back to the days when the United States and Britain were enemies and the French were allies. Allies brought in French advisors to teach the continental U.S. Army to be a good fighting force against the British. Tradition, and it works, till today, and the United States Army is stuck with it because it works. Organizations today, there are political movements, brand loyalties, gender, ethnic identities, class, race, faith. Many of these choices are up to each individual. Who decides the identity of each? That's hard to say, and that touches on the theory of this chapter, is you have all these different ideas. Who decides what it's going to be? All right, now discuss your personal ontology, epistemology, and axiology. These are pretty classy terms that you could bring up in a discussion with a random stranger and they would be impressed. Apply it to an organizational communication question you are or have struggled with in now, or etc., etc., etc. Okay, I personally believe, this is where I get atheist on you, sorry. I personally believe our existence is very loose in its interpretation. We have no technical documentation on what we are doing, and over the last several thousand years, we have settled on a few ideas that seem to be stable. One of those ideas is the scientific method, which calls into question every assumption we make, draws on observable and testable examination, and tries to cast off unquestionable, might I add, sacrosanct ideas. Thus, the epistemology of knowledge by science. So, epistemology was discussed on 145. As science progresses, there is less and less ground for untestable ideas to stand on ontologically, less mystical reason for our existence. 145. So, I can thank Neil deGrasse Tyson for that idea. That he says, of all the questions in our mystical universe, explanations for God retreat further and further back to a tinier corner the more that we question and scientifically evaluate causes and explanations for our nature. All right, and next to axiology, 145, for me calls on what is worth knowing, in that we choose to know whatever it takes to continue existing and getting along well. This is very subjective, and of course, with the different conflicting religious ideologies, some have decided that it's worth knowing the nature of a higher being. For nihilists, it's, I don't know why. That's the nature of a nihilist, is you just have absolutely no purpose to exist. For me, it's just, what does it take for us to appreciate our common existence, and what can we do to get along ethically? Okay, my subtle rant is over. In what ways do sense-making and structuration help you understand problems faced in modern organizations? Pick an example, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so we're going to skip ahead to page 185, talking about sense-making and structuration, where, okay, I know you're going to call on me to use my German skills to pronounce this, because I'm guessing that this guy is German, but the name is Weik. Did I get that right? Weik. Each member brings their own interpretation of the meaning of an organization. Each individual, so this is a systems approach, that the organization is not some great cosmic being that far supersedes the scope of an individual person. No, it's the reverse. Like, an organization is made up of its components, that they breathe the life into it, that they produce its nature over time it evolves. It takes inputs and finds the best way to get along, and in this, the way that the Weik is putting it is parallel to Darwin's theory of natural selection. Each person comes in with their own interpretation, but due to natural selection, whatever idea makes the most sense, is the most effective, is the most popular, that is the idea that wins out. Darwin's natural selection of the best interpretations. So the structure itself is the human interaction, not the org chart or the map of the different departments, not the jurisdiction, the floor plan of the office. It's not whoever has the best parking space out in the parking lot, who drives in our nicest car, who makes the most money. It's whatever ideas prove to be the most sustainable, that make the most sense. All right. Now moving on to discussing the delightful video that we got to watch. This was a tenured Stanford professor who got to talk for an hour to a bunch of people munching on breakfast and clattering their dishes and coughing and such. Break down the video lecture you watched. How do the ideas presented reflect or fit into the week's materials, etc., etc. I must respectfully dissent that this hour-long video did not directly address the concepts from Chapter 4 whatsoever. It could be that it touched on ideas from ethics in Chapter 2 and classical theory in Chapter 3, but the video was more about the personality traits of a tolerable boss. The speaker proposed that good bosses are not jerks, and that they are in tune with the challenges of their team members, that they've been through it and they can relate to it, and that they are assertive in action but sensitive and apologetic in their listening. The speaker did not discuss the nature of organizations or of communication, or even any modern theory of the conglomeration. He did not address whether applying human relations theory or human resources theory was effective in modern organizations. As a tenured Stanford professor, he just wanted to stroke the ego of those in attendance, that they should not go so far as to be a-holes to their employees. I appreciate any comment you can give. You can roast me, lambaste me about my atheism, but please do comment. Bye-bye.